take like 30 to 60 seconds. Tell me why you think you were chosen for this topic panel tonight.
Hello, everyone. I'm Joseph Wyno. I'm the president and executive director of the Oregon UAS Accelerator. We are a grant-funded, nonprofit, state-designated center of innovation excellence, and we support and we've received very generous grants from Business Oregon by way of Oregon lottery dollars. That allows us to support 35 startup founders that are, past the prototype phase. They're trying to gain more information and strategize on how to commercialize and scale their businesses around the unmanned aerial, ground, and maritime space. And why was I chosen? I think I was chosen because I tend to see raising money through the eyes of a startup founder. And I think, a lot of innovation takes place through startups that are here and in Pendleton and in Portland and all around.
Okay, I'm Greg Davis, the founder and CEO of Overwatch Imaging. Overwatch Imaging is an imagery intelligence technology company, venture-backed, working here in the Gorge for more than 10 years now. I think I'm part of this panel because, I started a startup that was initially bootstrap funded and then strategic investor or customer funded, and then venture funded, and along the way grant funded. I also work on the Oregon Investment Board, making investments in small businesses in the area with Oregon Investment Fund dollars. And was part of some prior stories of companies that built and grew and were acquired in part with the support of outside funding support. So just have seen a lot of different examples of how investment funding helps lead to kind of bigger and better outcomes. So yeah, happy to be part of the panel.
All right, Nathan DeVol. I've been in the community for about 26 years now. Some of you may know me as the owner and operator of Dog River Coffee in downtown River. I also have served on a number of different roles throughout various community organizations. Hood River City Planning Commission, currently with the Hood River White Salmon Bridge Authority as a representative from the Oregon side. Tonight I'm here with the hat on from the Mount Hood Economic Alliance, and I suspect that's why I'm on the panel, because no one else from the MHEA board wanted to do this, but I'm happy to do it. I think our organization often is, I suppose it's, I won't say overlooked, because I think people just don't know we exist. And I think we have some real opportunities. And in the short time that I've been on the Mount Hood Economic Alliance board since 2023, I've seen some relatively transformative opportunities to do small amounts of funding that make a big difference for some of our business sectors. And so I'm interested in maybe, hopefully putting that organization out there a little bit more, so people, some of y'all who don't know us, find out about us and can direct some of your contacts to us if need be. But yeah, that's,
Yeah, I didn't tell you I was going to ask that, did I? That's great. It really got what I was leading you to, is that everyone on this panel is wearing more than one hat. Joseph, I don't think did you mention your role on the board at OEN?
Oh yeah, so I serve on the board of directors of Oregon Entrepreneurs Network. I'm also an accredited investor with Keiretsu Pacific Northwest.
So everyone's wearing more than one hat, whether director of an accelerator, an investable business, and on the Oregon Investment Board, Main Street Business, also on MHA, Mount Hood Economic Alliance. All of them have a lot of different perspectives of what it takes to grow a business, of what funding is available, of what's appropriate. And I'm sure you guys have just like multitude of stories of businesses that you've worked with, or times where you've been raising funds for your business ventures. So I'm sure a lot of those will come out as we talk and get to know each other a little bit. So thank you guys so much for joining us. The first question I have I know you all prepared some notes and thoughts to like try to be as honest about this question, because I'm really looking for a knee-jerk reaction. When I say investing in a business, what are some of the thoughts that come to your mind, like an ink blot test of what that means to you, whether it's your business or towards someone else? And so I'll start with you again, Joseph. We won't always start with you.
So I'll be referring to my notes here. I mean, I've been incredibly busy the last 2 days, and Jakob knows this, trying to down select our startups into this top 10. But I think what comes to my mind is why, right? I mean, that's the first thing that comes to my mind, because at its best, investing in a business is really an act of belief, right? It's belief that you're solving a problem we're solving. It's belief in a team that can execute on that. And it's really belief in the future, that the future can be different as a result of the problem that you're trying to solve. So it's not just about capital moving into a company. For me, I don't see it that way. It's about whether the capital can unlock motion, create possibilities, and kind of turn this, the connection into something real.
Okay, my knee-jerk answer is investing in a business is agreeing to spend some of the future profits of a business ahead of making those profits by borrowing money to do it. And so I think that's aligned with the idea of just ultimate conviction that the thing that you're building is going to create a lot of future profits, but just needs a little boost to get there.
I will admit that this is the least complicated question that you left us with, and it was the one that I had the most difficulty in answering. And the reason is there's so many different contextual avenues that this question could go down. And I was trying to sort of think of not only my own experiences, but what I thought these two guys, because the three of us inhabit some very different places within the economy. Although I think that these guys are probably a little more closely aligned than I'm the outlier a little bit in that respect. But I thought this question was really interesting, and I was wondering if you were trying to trick us a little bit. No. But the simple reaction, if I'm following your words, if this is a Rorschach test, and what is your knee-jerk reaction? Mine would be helping a business to succeed. And so, but I want to preface that by saying that is taking the perspective that I'm the one doing the investing, and I using myself as a proxy for, in this case, the amount of economic alliance, but that's how I read that. So it would be helping a business to succeed. Now, there's a tremendous amount of additional context and details that can go into what does that business see as success? Where do they see the capital? I mean, I think that's what we'll get into in some of the follow-up questions as we move on. But that's my simple answer to Jakob's complicated question.
No, that's great, and I think that answers what I was getting at, because sometimes it's like, oh, it's optimism, it's great, there's all these things. Sometimes it's fear, you've had investments go wrong. Sometimes there's negative connotations, and Greg, I'll start with you with the next question, because there are terms like venture capital that sometimes certain people in certain federal administrations give you a lot of grief because, oh, your background is in VC, you care about rich people and making rich people richer. And so for that reason, sometimes it does carry a bit of a negative connotation. I'd argue that capital is a tool, depending on how you use it. As any other tool is, it can have good outcomes or less good outcomes. Can you talk about what either your business or other businesses that you've seen, some examples where outside investment has made some good things possible that might not be available otherwise? And try in some concrete terms, what happened because of investment that you've seen that wouldn't have happened otherwise?
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, I don't think VC has a negative connotation, because once you enter the VC bubble, it's all rosy, and there is no negative. But yeah, it's also an environment where 1 out of 10 really succeeds, and then 2 others out of 10 succeed somewhat, and 7 out of 10 fail. and by fail I mean go to zero. Yeah, it's like a different mental space or a different way of thinking about things. We talk about this a lot at our company, but yeah, I mean, in concrete terms, like our business wouldn't still be in business without venture capital. So that's, one real concrete thing. The great work that our team feels very proud of, that we provide to markets that are not giant and super economically exciting, wouldn't exist without venture capital supporting us and encouraging us to grow into other markets. We've built a company at Overwatch Imaging that provides solutions to a handful of different kind of market verticals or application spaces, and those all felt like great early fits for our technology, but many of them are not great businesses, not great ways of kind of monetizing our technology. And so, those would all just go away without venture capital saying, well, hey, that's good, but we need to find a better way to monetize the technology. So I think the idea of kind of supporting a bigger or best version of an idea, I think that's the real unlock that capital can bring. I guess I also, have to remind myself very regularly that all of the big companies, largely like tech companies, but all of the big tech companies that we hear about in our daily life now, all of the technology that we depend on for our daily life now, all were supported by venture capital. And we're part of the 1 or 3 out of 10 that made it through that process. That's brutal, but also like that's how, everything that we rely on today was born. So, that's kind of like how big ideas get built these days.
As far as wearing the hat that I'm wearing this evening, in this context, I don't have a lot of direct contact with venture capital. I operate primarily in the service sector from a business standpoint, and from an investor standpoint, my work with Mount Hood Economic Alliance also tends to be in that service or small manufacturing sector, so it's not quite the same. But I have some thoughts that this question spurred, which is, I'm wondering if often the negative connotation of venture capital and some of these things isn't a misalignment of intent. And I think we'll get to a little bit of this, is talking a little bit about how mentorship, one of the things that Jakob was talking about, is important, is that any business that wants to grow needs funding, needs capital, needs to get all these things, but often they're not necessarily thoughtful about what it means they're giving up. And so there are trade-offs to every investment and every choice. And I think some of the bad outcomes that are more highly publicized in the venture capital world, being voracious or vulture capitalist, I think some of those are probably, I think we can agree to that, but I think some of them are probably just misalignment in ideas of intent and what the founders of the companies wanted. And so I think it's both important that there is venture capital available, because it does fund and help to get things moving, but it also has to be deployed in the right way and with the right intent. And the capital is a tool. The capital doesn't really care, so it's important that through mentorship and business development, the folks that are taking in that capital understand what those trade-offs are. What are those things that are being asked of them for that investment? And I think perhaps that's something we'll maybe move into with later questions to talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, thank you. I think what people don't always realize is that raising capital is much about clarity as it is about the money. I mean, you're not just pitching for the money, you are pressure testing the strategy, the numbers, the story, the team, kind of all of the above. And I think the thing that, in your question you said, what are the things nobody tells you before you start? I think the process takes longer than people expect. I mean, it asks itself for time, patience, privacy, and sometimes a little bit of control. And you have to get comfortable with hearing not yet, or no, or the polite way Ventures says no, which is, well, that's a great pitch, but I'm not a lead investor, right? And that's kind of the nice way to say no. So I think founders need to go into it with their eyes wide open, and capital can certainly accelerate a business, but it also changes the way the business has to operate. It could even change the people in the business as well.
No, that's great. Thanks for leaving me. Thanks for the other questions until we get to them. Appreciate that foresight. A joke I have often when we talk about, I use the phrase capital access a lot, which is just consultant speak, doesn't really mean anything. And I joke about how like you break it down, capital means money and access means, can I have some?
Yeah.
And I have a lot of people that I talk to that are like, oh yeah, you have investors, you have grant money, like can I have some? And sometimes I think people think that they're ready. They might think that their business is an investable business, and they might be, and they might not be. And this isn't just limited to venture capital. It can be angel investing. It could be smaller rotating loan funds or investment funds or gap financing. And Nate, I'm going to turn to you first, and maybe you can define a little bit what gap financing is and a little bit more about what Mount Hood Economic Alliance does in that capacity. But the bigger conversation there is, talk to me about what does a business look like when it is genuinely ready to pursue outside capital, depending on which way it's going to go. What are green flags that you look for when you see those right businesses? And the converse of that is like, what are the red flags? What are some things that you'll see in a business that you say, yes, this is not the right business? And I think you both can speak on the businesses that you've seen, and I mean, maybe you can speak with your OID hat on a little bit, or when did you know Overwatch was ready, or when was it not? But that was like 8 questions in a row, but you guys can hear us, you're good.
First, and some of this is information that I frankly did not know as board member of Mount Hood Economic Alliance, so I'll tip my hand a bit here that I did need to go and get some cliff notes on how the organization was started. I have done a lot of different community service things, and so when someone says, hey, we need somebody to do something, I often simply say yes, and then I figure out why I'm there later. But I thought this is interesting because it does speak to what Joseph was talking about with lottery dollars. So the Mount Hood Economics, I'm not going to go through a long history lesson, so stay awake for just a second. The Mount Hood Economic Alliance was started as lottery dollars that were put together through what some of you who have been around in this world for a while will remember was a program called Regional Solutions. It no longer exists, but Regional Solutions was a way of lottery dollars being distributed throughout the state, and it was distributed to, the state was divided up into different regions, and each region within that regional solutions, those dollars, in the case of Mount Hood Economic Alliance, it was $900,000 in the mid-90s. Each one of those regions had some freedom. I don't exactly understand what the stipulations were of what they could spend it on and what they couldn't. But it seems as though they had some relatively, they had some leeway in what they wanted to do with it. In the case of our region is, for Mount Hood Economic Alliance's sake, is made up of Clackamas County, Hood River County, and Wasco County. So those 3 counties, through intergovernmental agreements amongst themselves, decided that what they wanted to do with those lottery dollars was they wanted to create a revolving loan fund to help businesses with getting businesses started, funding businesses, gap funding, that sort of thing. So that's where the organization started. One of the very unique things about the organization, I'm pitching the organization. How am I doing?
Good.
Guys?
Sounds great. I'm excited.
So I'm pitching the organization. One of the things that I found quite fascinating and immediately attracted me to staying with the organization now that I've been a board member since 2023, is that because the money has been through the organization enough times, it's no longer state money and it's not federal money. And so we have a freedom as Mount Hood Economic Alliance to lend to individuals or businesses that don't have social security numbers. Now that may seem like a small thing, but in a community such as ours, that's a really big thing, because there are a lot of people within our community who are doing well and thriving within the service and trades sector, not trade as you were talking about, trade businesses, but the trades, things like that, that are simply, they're not, they do not have the ability to go get bank funding. And so we have this ability, unique ability as Mounted Economic Alliance to take a flyer on those folks and help them get started or get up to that next level. And so that is a really important and interesting perspective that we bring, and I think it's unique. But your question was, how do we know when businesses are ready? One thing that I find very unique or interesting about our funding model is that they don't have to be ready. In fact, it's better if they're not. What I look for, I can only speak for myself as a board member, but I look for passion, because oftentimes in this size of business and the types of business that we're often helping out, they don't have the business fundamentals. They don't have a pitch deck. They don't have the things that you guys see regularly. They've got nothing but a passion for making food in a food truck, or they have a passion for doing drywall and painting houses. That's what they have, and so we're often left with scant fundamentals that have been at least vetted a little bit through McKed's organization. Amy Beavers does that work for us at Mounted Economic Alliance, and then it's just a lot of vibes, But I think that's important also because it teaches all of us as board members to sort of to compare things, what those vibes feel like, what do they mean. I think that they do mean something. It's the passion for the thing that they're doing, and I think that these guys probably see that in perhaps a different way. But that's sort of what, if the question is how do you know when a business is ready to take on capital, in our case and in my particular setting, it really is it's a vibes, but you also have numbers. I mean, some of the green flags are people can bring you some idea of what they sell, or how much they sell, or how much they charge, and how much they make off of it, right? I mean, if they can't bring that, it's the what was your term for it, Joseph? The not yet. What's your not yet term?
Yeah.
I don't want to be a lead investor.
No, so I love your pitch, but we don't lead.
Gotcha.
We don't lead an investment.
Yeah. But that's one of the roles that we play, though, is we do blend mentorship with gap funding. And I'm sorry, you had asked me specifically to talk about gap funding.
Yeah.
So one of the things that an organization like Mounted Economic Alliance can do is someone can go to a bank and say, we'll use some numbers of stand-ins, but they need $100,000 to do the thing they want to do. And the bank looks at their information as like, not a chance, I'll give you 40. They can then come to us and say, hey, the bank's willing to give us 40 if we can get this other amount from you guys, and so in that case we would be the 60. Those numbers are not accurate, but for a proxy, that's what we are able to do, is we're able to then enhance what the banks can and can't do to lend a hand. It's often the other way around, really. We give the last 20%, and the banks can give the first 80 or so. So hopefully that answered the questions. I'm sorry, I may have talked too long, but you guys are up.
Oh, my turn?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think a business is ready for outside funding or capital when it knows exactly what it's trying to build. I think that's super important to keep in mind. I also think that, why the capital matters to them, right? And how the funding will change their trajectory for the next 12 to 24 months. I think if they're kind of ambiguous about that, or they're not clear about that, I don't think they're ready for funding, And to Nick's point, kind of alternative ways of funding, raising money is super hard. It's not as easy, and some of the founders come to us and yeah, we have a raise of $1.5 million, right? That's our pre-seed round, and okay, how did you arrive at that number? Well, it just seems to be the average that all startups are raising pre-seed rounds for, right? And no, that's not the right answer. And it's super difficult, like you said. You get a lot of no's, and you gotta kiss a lot of frogs until you find your prince, And so what we do at our Accelerator program that I think is super interesting is that we have the nation's only 12-week government SIBR and SITR grant curriculum. And why that's significant is that most of our founders can see the end of their runway, and so they immediately think that the only way that they can extend that runway is through equity capital. But if you have a kind of a cogent plan to secure either a state or federal grant, even a foundation grant, to extend that runway in a non-dilutive way, which is even better, that's what we do. So we have a 12-week curriculum that teaches startup founders how to find grants, how to determine if those grants are a fit, how to write those grants, how to answer any questions or comply with those grants, and then once they get the money, how do they integrate that grant funding into their general budget without commingling the funds because of reporting and compliance rules. And so, really, you're not ready to raise capital if that idea is still vague. The strategy is shifting from week to week. The founder is hoping money solves a clarity problem instead of a growth problem, because the money you shouldn't take in money if you're still trying to solve a clarity issue. It should be to help you grow and scale the business. And something that Greg touched upon that I think is super important is, and it's counterproductive to what I do, but I believe in it because I was a founder myself for many years, and I bootstrapped my business. And lucky for me, I didn't have to ask for equity funding to grow my business. I did it through just revenue growth in my company. And I think if in a perfect world, that's the best way to grow a business, not to ask for money, but do it and grow it yourself.
Yeah.
If we could go to the next one, if you want.
Yeah.
It's up to you.
My thought on this one is, when are you ready? I think it's clear from the sort of company side when the real opportunity that you can see exceeds the real capacity that you have, and that's a great place for capital to come in. I think aligned with some of the prior comments. I think when you have enough clarity in what the business is, what the product is, what the market is, what the sales motion is, but just can't do enough of it because the opportunity is greater than the resource that you currently have. I think that's when it makes sense to decide to spend your future profits now to kind of capture that opportunity because there's such conviction that it'll be worth it. So I think that feeling of and that can scale from very early stage businesses may not have all the infrastructure, but if there's a clear vision of an opportunity that greatly exceeds the capacity, then I think that's the right time for investment. But I also, wholeheartedly agree that the best time is never to take an investment as a business.
A lot of businesses I talk to, the phrase comes up that I like hearing. It's good problems. It's like, oh, we're out of room. We can't grow anymore because we're out of space. It's like, okay, that's a problem. It's a good problem, but it's still a problem. So that's great feedback. So let's imagine your business. You decided, for whatever reason, because it's how you want to spend your time is pursuing outside capital. You're like, yep, this is the way I want to go. I don't want to bootstrap. I have an idea. I know how I would use this money. I have the clarity. I have the problem of growth. What comes next? What can you expect for that entrepreneur or startup or business? I decide I need to go start looking for outside capital. What can they expect as they start walking down that hallway?
Who wants to go first? Phil has a great answer.
Yeah, I'll take that one. So I think to me, it's really clear that investors, first and foremost, seek a return on investment. And I think that gets lost a lot in the sort of mythology or storytelling about fundraising and especially sort of in the venture capital world, but I think it also gets sort of mythologized in in the service world, that investment is somehow like a gift to allow you to chase your dreams or whatnot. No, I mean, I think investment is meant to create a return on investment, and investors are generally like quite clear about that. And now, yes, there is a belief in the business. There's a necessary passion to that's necessary to create that return on investment. But I think that's the kind of main finding that I've seen with all the various investors that we've seen is like the investors want something to happen. Whether it's a Business Oregon giving us kind of grants, it's to create jobs, and it's like we can kind of dress that up in nice language, but like it's also pretty clear, like that's the goal. Yeah. And for our investors, it's our like pure financial investors, they're pretty clear that like, hey, the goal is a 10x return on this, or shoot, we want a chance at a 100x return on this. So that then drives the behavior of the business. And so, I think that I didn't quite appreciate that when I went into the process, how like black and white that would be. That like the good news stories that we create selling into poorly monetized markets weren't really that well received because the goal is to create a return on investment. So I think keeping that like really front of mind is important. That from the investor's perspective, the goal is to get a return on investment.
Yeah, I'd like to sort of piggyback on that, and maybe I'm putting your words into my own words, but it's probably imperative for the founder, business owner who's going out there to look for capital to really do some soul searching, and a couple things. One is to understand that the investor wants something back, right? That could be something. So that this is twofold. I'll come back to the different types as I see it of investment, but it's also incumbent upon the business owner or founder to understand sort of what they're giving up by taking on the funding, right? And so if it's a bank, what does a bank want? The bank wants an on-time payment and the interest that you've agreed to. So that's one avenue, right? So that's a type of control that you're giving up by taking in capital. If it's an outside investor, is an investor who intends to want to be a part of the business, who has some ideas of their own or is in the same field, and that's totally fine. But as a business owner, founder, someone who's looking for capital, it's important that you understand where that capital is coming from and what the motivation of that capital. So I'm taking kind of the opposite side from you guys and taking the like, I don't want the money because I think you're gonna, But and I don't mean that in an adversarial way, but I think it's important for businesses to both, as Joseph, you said, that have the clarity of what they're trying to do, but also having the clarity of what comes with the money. It isn't just someone giving you money for no good reason. They want something, and you have to be clear in your own mind of what that thing is. And if you're willing to make that bargain, then so be it. If you're someone who really doesn't have the clarity, but someone is offering you capital with some mentorship and some ideas because they're in the same industry and can help you, and you think that's what you need, that's fine. But you need to make sure you know that and understand what those trade-offs are, because that's the only way that capital will be it's the only way, if capital is a tool, that tool will be the right tool for that job. It's the only way that if it's a nail, that capital, that tool is a hammer and not a screwdriver. So that's a terrible metaphor, but you get the point.
That was awesome. Yeah,
I think what matters most is not just the capital itself, and kind of great touch upon this, but it's that what the capital makes possible for the community. And that's particularly important in communities like Hood River and Pendleton, where I am, because ultimately, you're right, it's about jobs. It's about kind of engaging and leveraging to maybe create stronger supply chains in our communities, more stable careers, and an ecosystem that starts to build on itself. And I think Hood River is a perfect example of that, with you being the epicenter for remote sensing. I mean, that started with a couple companies, but the community was involved in that to make it what it is what it is today. So capital is just a tool. But the real question is whether it creates something durable and lasting beyond the money or the check that you receive. Yeah.
We spend a lot of time, when you think of investing, we often go to the venture and the angel, but I have a lot of conversation with people who come to me thinking of looking for a connection there, and I have a conversation with them, and I'm just like, hey, it's the way you think you want to go, but have you explored some of the other options that are available? Talk to me about some of the other capital pathways that do exist beyond that investing. And maybe there's a story of a business that you worked with that decided, hey, maybe they started down the hallway of investment and they decided that wasn't the right version for them for a number of reasons. What are some signifiers that, yeah, we should do a different door, we should not go investment? So talk about some of those times where that's actually not the right way for them.
Yeah. Yeah, so, venture and angel, they get a lot of, attention. And they're only one part of the picture, right, as you mentioned. So I think depending on what stage that your startup is in, there are appropriate ways to fund the company at a particular stage. For example, venture money or even angel money isn't really the greatest money to use to buy equipment, for example, for your business. I would revert over to the SBDC in Messiah and say, why don't you go talk to the SBDC about getting a low interest 504 loan to allow you to purchase equipment. I think, as I mentioned, grant funding, right, through foundations, through state, through federal means are a great way to extend your runway and help you build your business without diluting your equity in the company. And Greg's right. I mean, at the end of the day, venture and angel, they're really focused on return on investment, right? They want to see something in typically 3 to 5 years that has multiple X of returns. So there are a number of ways: grants, gap financing, debt financing. I wouldn't just limit yourself to. And a lot of our startups do. They just think that equity funding is the only way that they can actually help grow their businesses. But there are a lot of other funding tools out there.
Sure. Okay. So I work on the Oregon Investment Board. Somewhat similar to Mountain Hood Economic Alliance. The Oregon Investment Board lends money through typically a 3 to 5 year loan program to businesses that can't get loans through banks. So that's a nice option for businesses that are trying to build something. I think the best way to finance your business is through sales. Is sort of like the best way to sort of pressure test your ideas and really truly align with what a market is willing to pay for. So that's kind of my preferred way of financing our business, and that's been the biggest investor in our business has been our sales. So that's a point of great pride. But yeah, lots of different ways. I think one thing to keep in mind is just like, if you had the money to do it, would you invest yourself in what you're pitching? It's like a hypothetical question. I recognize it's like often not a realistic thought, but I think it's the right thought process to say like, well, if I wouldn't invest in this, why would I ask strangers to invest in this? So I think that's kind of a framework for thinking about where to get investing from. But yeah, bank loans. We've pursued bank loans before and successfully done that option. So there's lots of different ways, but yeah, I think the sort of trickiest part is like figuring out the interests of the investors, what they're interested in, and then kind of like how much money you need and what timeline you need and how much you're kind of willing to give to get that.
The only thing I suppose I would add, and I think both of these gentlemen are alluding to it, is many of the organizations out there, so a straight venture or angel or whatever category you want, type of investor, isn't necessarily going to hold your hand and help you. They believe you when you say, I can do this and I will get you X return. But groups like Mounted Economic Alliance, Oregon Investment, all these, and even the things that Joseph's outfit does where they train you, there are resources out there to get you to that next level so you don't have to keep hearing no, but you can be ready for the yes and really have your fundamentals nailed down. And I suppose that's one of the things that I would like to see myself for the organization that I'm a board member of, is just see better visibility, and that's on us obviously, but we do offer those things. I mean, the people that come to Mounted Economic Alliance sit down with one of our staff members, Amy Beavers, and she basically says, your business plan looks terrible. Let's see if we can make it, because she knows who those people have to pitch it to, which is us, and she helps them. And I believe that those folks, even if they get a no from us, end up with some real value to that. And so I would hope that through Jakob's work, through SBDC, we can get some folks to come see us and utilize some of these services, because I think they're valuable. And there are probably people out there that are on the cusp of being good candidates for other funding, but they just don't know it yet because they don't understand their business. They understand the thing they want to do, and they've got passion and they have drive, but there are some other fundamentals that they could use a little bit of help with. And I think that's great that there are organizations out there that do offer that sort of assistance. And I hope that more people find a way to avail themselves of those services.
Okay, so I will make a quick pitch though, kind of the opposite of your question here, for venture capital, which is to say this: I think there's some ideas where you really can't get there in a slow and steady approach. One couldn't today build a competitor to Intel in a bootstrap model. It just wouldn't happen. Or I think that's true across the entirety of the tech space, the AI space, really any product space at this point. And so, one piece of feedback I receive a lot from my venture investors is like, hey, are we really sure we want to be doing this, this thing that we're doing now that's like fine, profitable business? Because is that keeping us back from pursuing the better opportunity? And so I think kind of trying to calibrate what is really the opportunity, what is really the scope of this idea that we're pursuing, that we're passionate about, what's kind of the right sizing for that idea. I think capital is a great way to enable focusing on that. And so, skipping some of the stepping stones and going straight to the bigger answer. So, there's sometimes when bigger capital is a great answer.
Can I steal your host here for a second and pose a question?
Yes,
to
please.
these
Absolutely.
guys?
Yeah.
So Greg and Joseph, I'm going to steal Jacob's thunder here a little bit. I want to ask you two a question that occurred to me listening to both of you. Can you guys speak a little bit to how capital distorts some of these businesses' ability to be as good as they could be? And let me clarify that question a little bit and try to make a little more sense. You have someone who's bootstrapping, like yourself, who's innovative because they have to be, right? Because capital is tight. They don't have a lot of they're using the what's the old saw, baling wire and duct tape and gum to hold things together. But that's the secret sauce, right? And so they believe that the time is now to get more money. They get more money, and they forget to be innovative. Is that something that you guys see, and do you counsel folks to that end? And how do you manage those sort of expectations and keeping people on task with the passion and the innovation that they've showed that got them to your doorstep?
All right, I'm done, guys. Thanks.
That's a really interesting question, Nick. I think, Nate, sorry. Fundraising is a full-time job, right? Raising money. And it's very difficult for small teams to raise money and to keep their eye on the business as well. So there has to be some divide and conquer there if you want to be effective at growing your business and raising funds at the same time. It's almost impossible for maybe a founder, co-founder to kind of dedicate themselves on raising money and keeping their eye on the business. So if you find yourself in that situation, and we see a lot of startups that are in that situation, sometimes they lose focus on what's important to the business. Funding is incredibly important for these companies, again, at whatever stage they are. It's important because, you know, if they are in a competitive market, the funding allows them to get to the market quicker with their solutions. But again, it's tough. It does distort the business. It does change people. It does change teams. I was really fortunate enough to help when I used to run a very large accelerator program in Southern California, and one of my startups actually went to IPO with his company, and we got into it and we researched it and we talked about it, and I said, Paul, I said, do you realize that if you go down this route, likely when you emerge from this, you will no longer be the president or the CEO of this company, and your team will likely change as well. And so are you prepared for this huge change in your business? And are you prepared to give up that, you know, because it's something that you've nurtured and raised? Are you prepared to give that up? And we had to go back and forth about that. And he said, yeah, I think I'm ready to do it. And I said, okay, if that's the case, and just be happy with, you know, what you get out of this. And I think you're young enough to start another business. And that's exactly what he did.
Yeah, okay, so if the question is, how does it change the business? Maybe some of the downsides that come along with capital. I think, yeah, certainly being bigger, growing, creates a lot of pains in itself, and I think that the old saw of the baling wire and duct tape. If someone's going to step away from doing those things, that means kind of backfilling those jobs, and the jobs still need to get done. And so, you know, if you're going to grow, like, you got to bring on more people to do those jobs. And with each new employee, there's risk, and with each new customer, there's risk. And so, yeah, I mean, I think generally as you grow, you kind of like multiply the risk, and that's hard. And so, yeah, I do think companies, once they start down the path of investment, do give up some smaller good outcomes. You know, I think a lot of the venture-backed founders that I work with all dream of running like a small services business that you know, it's like you could put your arms around and like understand, and you know, kind of like imagine what you're going to do tomorrow. And so yeah, I mean, I do think it changes things for sure. And again, I think the main thing is like trying to align the idea that you're passionate about with like the size and scale of what that business looks like that is achieving or filling that idea. And getting that exactly right is really hard. You don't want to overshoot that, and you don't want to undershoot that. You know, so I think you can be undercapitalized and you can be overcapitalized, and either of those are bad. And yeah, you feel those bad parts emotionally.
Can I ask one more follow-up? Sure. Sorry, I'm just stealing my again. I have one more follow-up to these guys. So when you are mentoring and working with businesses, Joseph, I think specific. Well, actually, I think Greg, you as well in your role with the Oregon investment folks. Do you ever, because this is out of my wheelhouse. I don't know anything about this, so I'm genuinely asking this question because I'm interested. Do you advise some of these folks to find somebody to do the fundraising and keep that founder working in the business and doing the things that they do the best? Do you guys ever talk about that as maybe one of those roles is not backfilling what the owner and founder used to do, which is the special sauce, but the other thing is not, I mean, it's not important, but it's a little more cut and dried, which is going out and trying to find funding. Do you guys ever talk about that as a model?
Well, I've just been told by sources that I trust that it just doesn't work that way. So I don't have much experience trying it that way because I've been told it just simply doesn't work. That if you can't bring your passion to the fundraising process, then investors just won't show up to even hear your pitch.
It really depends.
Do you think that's right, though? I mean, it sounds like you're taking issue with somebody who said something to you recently you don't agree with.
No,
I would just love to hear. This is why
yeah,
I'm
that's right.
actually
Yeah.
interested in this question because it's a potential role that you could bring on,
Yeah.
and is it something that could have some efficacy or
Yeah.
not?
I kind of agree with Craig. You have to be as passionate enough about your startup that when it becomes important for you to raise funds, that passion has to exude and it has to kind of transfer to the investor, right? They know immediately if you're not really in it to win it. And so I think in that case, when you're trying to raise equity, it's important for the founder or co-founder to be super engaged directly with investors. I think on the other hand, if you're going after non-dilutive funding like grants, I think that's an area where if you do have the budget, you could look at hiring an outside company to help you secure state, foundation and federal grants, because that's not just pitching, but that's a very specialized skill set in terms of writing grants and complying with grants and so on. So I hope that answered your question.
Okay. Sorry, Jakob.
No, that's okay. I really like the next question. I want to get to it, but I also want to add one more thing because I can't, and maybe you guys can feel with me here, because I can't tell you how many times I've heard a pitch from a technical founder that I just want to claw my eyes out, because either it's so high level that I just go brain dead and I'm just too stupid to understand what they're saying, or it's just so dry that I have no enthusiasm or energy. And I'm like, man, I am like a salesman by nature. And I'm like, and a lot of times I'm smart enough to like figure out what they're talking about, and I'm like, is there a job for me? I can just like go pitch for people. But then what you're saying is like, well, but you want the founder to be involved because you want them to have that passion, even if they are more technically minded.
So I live that every day because, I run this deep tech accelerator program, and virtually all my founders come from very focused academic backgrounds or pedigrees, right? They're aerospace engineers, they're mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, computer scientists, or some type of AI engineer, right? So consequently, when it comes to their pitch kind of reflects who they are and how they kind of view the world. So super heavy in terms of spreadsheets and data and things like that. The total opposite of what investors want to see, right, on the deck itself. They just want to see as few bullet points as possible, maybe a few images, and just talk to that, right? And so you're right. And so these founders so that's what we do. They come to us with half of the whole, right? The technical half is there, but they're missing that business investor readiness, business readiness, and more importantly, those soft skills that allow them to be a technical founder, yet pitch in a way that can, be that salesman, right? So it's super important, yeah.
Yeah, I think the point I'd add on to that and to your idea, Jacob, like, well, you could just be a pitch man.
That would be so good.
Is that, I think investors want to know who's going to make the decisions. And yes, at first glance, we just follow the plan. But I think investors want to know, like, well, who's going to make the decisions when you get off plan? And I think that's where, knowing the founders, knowing the decision makers becomes really important. And similarly for founders, knowing kind of who the investors are and what they care about and who they are and what they're going to do when you get off plan is really important. The idea that, if you can't kind of figure out how to pitch, you're probably not going to be that great at leading a company through, sales motions and hiring and all those things. So, I think that kind of like works out to the right answer. A notion that has always stuck with me and from an early investor call that I had is certainly like in the kind of high stakes venture investing, the idea that we are each making each other's careers. And I really mean that. And I think it's like that's taken a while for me to like really absorb the idea that we're making each other's careers. And so like this one investment, if it's successful, will be an unlock that is the main thing that is the highlight of my entire career. And for the investor, that investment decision would be the highlight of their career. And so like that's a really important, powerful thing, right? I mean, you know, if you look at the span of a 50-year career, it's all decided by one investment decision. And so, yeah, I mean, the like importance that goes into that is powerful, and I think is part of the process. And so, yeah, like showing up with passion is a must do.
Okay, I want to switch to a question that's a little bit more locally minded, and Joseph, I'll give you a pass on this because your time here has been much shorter than the other panelists here, but I want to talk about the other side of the statement, investing in the Gorge, of what the Gorge looks like. We are well aware of the things that are the constraints in our local community. You know, there's childcare, there's housing. We're in a national scenic area, and we only have certain developmental restrictions within boundaries. But when it comes to like investing here, whether that's like time and energy, or it's money, what's working, what's not, where's there opportunity for anyone here to get more involved? Are there problems that you see that like a bag of cash would fix? I mean, probably everything, but yeah, talk a little bit about that. I mean, you guys have been here. Greg, we filmed a video where we talked about the Gorge is a great place to live and work, like no less than 7 times, like that exact phrase. And so like, it is a great place to live and work. So how can we invest further into the Gorge?
Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think to the idea of like investors generally are seeking a return on investment. I do think there's this kind of notion of like lifestyle businesses in the Gorge. And generally, like more broadly in Oregon, like Oregon is really worker friendly or like people friendly, but not business friendly. And I don't mean to be against those things, but those things all do weigh against returns on investment. Like that's like just plain true. So that I think that's a challenge that this area has. Is I think there's a earned perception in this area that people here are here to play, and employees here expect a high ratio of benefits to work, and government agencies here seem willing to increase taxes, frequently. And again, like I don't particularly have opinions about those things, but those things all definitely weigh against investing in the Gorge. And so, that's something that we'll have to keep in mind as we're building businesses here. If our mandate from our investors is to, grow as fast as possible or create as much return on investment as possible, eventually some of those things come into friction. So yeah, here we do have trouble having enough qualified candidates for a lot of our roles. So, that's a real challenge, and it's related to childcare, it's related to housing, it's related to cost of living, it's, all the things. So, one of my favorite points is about we're just kind of building a community here, and I do think that, rising tide sort of supports everybody. I think that a strong community encourages more people to come into the community, which helps businesses get stronger, and businesses of all types be stronger. And so, yeah, I think it's important for us to continue or even encourage more of the Gorge and Oregon being a great place to do business. So Oregon has a new chief prosperity officer and a prosperity initiative. I think those are important ideas to make sure that this is a good, or at least good enough place to do business. Because yeah, investors I think will make quick decisions and say, hey, I've got, you know, an idea in Oregon, I've got an idea in a different state, that other state's more business friendly, all else equal, I'll go there.
I think that there are a couple things to think of. I think, Joseph, you stole a term that I was going to use tonight, which is an ecosystem, and this is apropos of this particular question. One of the things, and I'm going to say something that I can't back up because I'm not in either one of you or one of the other business folks who maybe have started a particularly tech business in Hood River, but my presumption is those folks have started those businesses here either because they were, one, already here and had an idea, or more likely they located here because the amenities, right? And so, and those amenities can be looked at in a number of different categories. They can be the outdoor amenities, which are, you know, things such as the proximity of the river, the proximity of Post Canyon, the proximity of the mountain, and, you know, all of those things. But amenities are also things like the service sector, like what I'm in. I mean, those are all things that do play a part in why people both locate businesses here and or keep them here. Either because as founders and business owners, they want to avail themselves of those things, or because they believe that will draw employees to their businesses. And so understanding that ecosystem and all the different parts that are all the different representative species, if you will, in that ecosystem is important, that we do continue to sort of nurture each one of those levels, because without the service sector, that's an amenity that goes away and is the next person who one of these fellows tries to hire going to think of Hood River as like a cool place to be, right? If you flip that script and say, if you take away one of these employers, what does that do to my part of the ecosystem, right? So these things are all tied together. And so one of the terms that I have been thinking a lot about lately is the idea of sort of, I'll use two terms, freedom and resiliency. And so one of the things that I think we can look to do as small communities that are not in the metro area and do have unique ecosystems, economic ecosystems, is to maybe start thinking about ways that we can leverage each other's strengths to do things that are unique to us and support our community, you know, perhaps without the statewide and federal sort of people coming in to help. So what's a concrete example of that? One thing that I've been thinking about, I'm literally spitballing, I thought of this like 2 hours ago, but one of the things that I realized is that, so if we take housing, so I want to use a concrete example that Jakob has mentioned. So if we take a look at, we have some obvious geographic constraints. We're in a steep valley that has a river that cuts down the middle of it at a weird angle. That makes it hard to build housing. We have, in the state of Oregon, we have, you could call it not business friendly, the Senate Bill 100, which is our land use statutes, which are designed to protect farm use from the encroachment of residential, you know, housing and people. These are all things that are difficult, but we also do still have developable land. But we have that within small cities without very big budgets. You know, Hood River, Pendleton, you know, White Salmon. And so one of the things that I was thinking about before I came down here is, what are the opportunities for some of these business sectors to invest directly in, say, infrastructure? So a great example, to go back to housing, one of the things that we have in Hood River is within the city limits, we have a tremendous amount of residentially zoned property that doesn't have houses on it right now. And probably should, considering the demand that we have, both from employees of some of the larger businesses and even the smaller businesses. And one of the biggest reasons those things are not developed is because there's just not infrastructure. And when I say infrastructure, I mean roads, sewer, stormwater. Those are very expensive, and in small cities in Oregon, you simply have a hard time, you know, bonding for those things or finding the money to do it. So what's the possibility of an investment group talking about VC or angel investing? What about infrastructure banking from the larger employers? You know, directly buying that, not buying, but directly putting money into the ground in these communities to encourage that sort of stuff. So if, for example, a group were started by a bunch of the, you know, tech businesses or businesses in Hood River County, put together a grant organization and had a pot of money, the city of Hood River could take money from that grant fund and put sewer and water in somewhere on the west side where there's vacant land. I mean, this is all, and I'm way outside of what you were asking, but I think it is instructive because it's these are sort of ideas that are outside the box a little bit, that do talk a little bit to the notion of sort of resiliency and freedom within our own communities, where we get to drive our own solutions for the future instead of either waiting for someone else to do it, but also leveraging the fact that we do have an ecosystem that has all of the species in it right now. So what can we do to put those things together? I don't. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that's good.
I'll answer for something else.
Can I add?
Please. Yeah, so one thing that is, kind of, I would say, geographically agnostic, that's kind of looming over us as all Oregonians, is Senate Bill 1507, and I don't know, I'm sure you're aware of that, with the QSBS, or Quality Small Business Stocks, and how, in the past, we were rewarded as early, founders, early investors, that we got a tax break for liquidity events in terms of capital gains. But now it seems that won't be the case any longer, and that founders and investors will be taxed at the normal capital gains rate. And I think that is super important to me, because I have founders, and founders are pretty opportunistic, right? They're going to look for states that have a little less friction than what this proposes. So I keep my eye on it. I think it's probably going to pass, and if it does, I think as startup businesses and founders and investors, we will have to adapt. Otherwise, it's going to be super difficult.
Joseph, can I ask you a question on that? I'm not familiar with the details that were either one of you, but are there ways of keeping that investment rolling forward where it doesn't become a liquidity event? Is there some time frame where so like a 1031 exchange of a house, right? So long as you purchase a home of similar value and type within a certain amount of time, that liquidity event doesn't happen. Do you know if that's in that legislation to allow that money? The presumption, obviously you would want to keep that money rolling over, which I suppose the legislation would be to try to prevent people from cashing in on something and taking that money out of the state to go somewhere else, right? But if you could keep it, do you know for sure if that's?
Do we need a backup question? Does everyone know what we're talking about with the Senate bill as it pertains to investor? It's okay if you want an explanation. Okay.
So
What is the question?
Maybe Greg, you want to take a shot at it, since it might impact you.
Okay, Senate Bill 1507, Oregon bill that is being marketed as a new way to pay for education, creates, among other new taxes, a tax on qualified small business stock, which is currently exempt from capital gains tax, which means that the gains on starting a business and any proceeds received from selling that business are tax exempt. So I don't know in sufficient detail to answer your question about rolling it over. There are rollover rules. I think the sort of short answer to it is, to the sort of venture-backed technology growth sector, it will mean that all the founders move out of Oregon.
Yeah.
So I think that's fairly straightforward, and has been the reaction of 100% of the founders that I've
And I think
talked to.
investors,
So-
investors go where startups are, and if they're not here, you'll find that the investment will dry up as well as a result of that.
Yeah, so it's, it's sort of like the way this bill is structured, I think, makes it sort of a disincentive for founders to live here. Like, it would be less expensive to buy another house somewhere else than to not buy another house somewhere else.
Yeah. So white salmon just became a lot more attractive.
We all can stay where you are.
Yeah.
We are very close to time. My last question was the typical, what's your takeaway for the audience? I'm gonna skip it. You can address it later directly. I did want to leave time if there's a couple. We have a couple questions in the audience. If anyone has a question that you'd like to ask this distinguished panel. Noah, can you yell? Do you want to yell?
Yeah, I can speak up a little bit. This is a little bit adjacent to what you guys are speaking about, but I guess I'm kind of interested in the relationship between public financing and private investment, and when a business accepts both, if they were to, where do you feel a business should take a stance on that split? If at some point the two interests start to split, you know what I mean? If these two interests are no longer in line with each other, and investors want one thing and public funding is giving you another thing, who do you feel like a business should be beholden to? And then to maybe be clear, the grant funding is, I'm assuming, I should be clear, is usually tax dollars. So I'm trying to articulate this issue between like public funding and private funding.
Public funding and, that's a really good question. It's a complicated question, right? Because every startup business is different. It's a fingerprint on your finger, and some, I don't think the public funding will be as stringent as the private funding. So when you have a lead investor that's leading in your investment, they usually determine the terms of the investment as well. And within those terms are, and when you pitch, you have to say, okay, I want X amount of dollars. Here's how I'll utilize those funds. And sometimes the utilization of funds may not work for the investor. The investor may not want you to use those funds for X. Y and Z are okay, but not X. And I think that's where potentially, public funding could help you fund X as opposed to Y and Z. I wish I could be more specific, but every startup at every stage has just a little bit different DNA, and in terms of funding, public, private, it can get kind of complicated. So, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know how to cleanly answer that. I think with every contract a company signs, be it an investment or a grant or a customer sale, you sort of accumulate new terms and conditions.
Yeah.
And have to comply with all of them, and so that's always a project.
Yeah, so funny story. When we look at startups, one of the things we look at are their cap tables. And cap tables are generally how many investors they have, how many investors, how many, grants, all that stuff's on the cap table. I had a startup recently that came to us, and we were kind of doing our vetting and due diligence on the startup, and we said, well, can we see your cap table? And their cap table had 600 investors.
Kickstarter?
Yeah, and so I was like, okay, did everybody invest $5? I mean, what's going on here? But they started as a crowd-funded company that, they're on WeFunder or something, and they raised like $500,000, but they had 600 or something like that investors. So they wanted to invest additional funds, right? They're at a point where they needed venture, and I said, that's going to be super tough because the lead investor in that round is going to determine the terms, and you're going to have to convert those 600 investors to agree with the terms of the new round, and turned out to be a super nightmare. And he said, maybe I should just stick to crowdfunding. And so that's kind of my story there. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
Noah, one of the things that I don't know if this is where your question was going, but one thing I can bring to the table from my experience with the Hood River White Salmon Bridge Authority is because we're entirely looking for, grant funding, with the exception of a low interest loan called the TIFIA. I don't know what the acronym means, I'm sorry. I usually try to define acronyms and not just throw them out there, so my apologies. But with the exception of that, which the future tolls will pay for, it's almost all grant, funding of some sort. And so one of the things that we have had to contend with is making sure that grants don't disagree with each other in terms of what they're actually doing, which I think is maybe where you're going. And so what the best way to explain that is that you wouldn't want to take a grant over here which has this other grant over here preclude you from spending money on a certain thing that this grant is what you intended it for. And so I think this is what Joseph was getting at, and Greg, there's some complications there. I'm guessing, and you can clarify this, maybe your question was more about ends instead of means, which is if you're taking federal dollars and the idea is that it's for a benefit to the larger community perhaps, and your more retail side investor is looking for a return that's for them specifically. Is that kind of what misalignment you were getting at?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to kind of consolidate 2 or 3 questions here. One of the things I'm trying to kind of ask is, in some ways, like, who do you feel a business is most beholden to, right? Is it, in this particular case I'm talking about, like, let's say you take grant money. I think, I could be totally mistaken, but I believe in situ and its kind of nascency took grant money to kind of get off the ground and then was later purchased by both, right? That to me kind of invokes this question of kind of who they're beholden to at the end of the day, right? Because initially they put taxpayer dollars and then translate that over.
We're going back to Joseph on this one.
Yeah.
Or Greg, what might you?
I think, there are certain things that grants allow you to do typically, and certain things that, like for example with grants, very few allow you to use the grant money to help you, secure a really strong IP or patent portfolio. So you can't use grant money typically for those type of things, where that might be a really good use case for private funding. But I will say that, I think grants are a lot less stringent than private equity. I think at the end of the day, if you have both, I think you are beholden to private equity as opposed to these grants. I mean, these grants are largely just reporting and compliance and making sure that you use the funds in a way that's consistent with the contract or the agreement. But private equity, it can be, not just what you agreed to, but if they require a board seat, you're having to answer and include them in your team decisions or board decisions that you make. So to answer your question in really kind of a pure way, I think you're much more beholden to private equity than you would be at for public non-dilutive equity.
Thank you.
Does anyone have one more question? I have time for one more. That's okay. You can ask them. We'll stick around for a little bit here. Finny kicks us out at 8, so we'll get out before 8. Please make sure that the charcuterie is gone before you leave. Just everyone do your part there. But these guys will stick around. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you guys so much. A great example of private funds and public funds. Public funds, Business Oregon, thank you so much for letting us put on an event for the venue and the charcuterie. But thank you GTA for GTA membership providing alcohol in your first drink for a GTA happy hour. So there's a good compromise there. I appreciate it. So
Partnership.
yeah, exactly. I'll put the slideshow back on, QR codes for all the events coming up. May 14th, we're back here for the last one of the season. But before you leave, say hi to someone you haven't met before, and we'll see you next month.